Hi, in today's video I wanted to talk about Gen Z and millennials. Again, this is not the first time I have made a video about different issues of these generations. I'm very close to being in the middle, actually. I know for a long time older people just used the term millennial to refer to the younger generation as a whole, but actually, millennials is the generation of people who were born from 1981 to there's some discrepancy of where the cutoff is for millennials and Gen Z. I've seen some things that say 1993, some that say 1994, some that say 1995, some that say 1996, and also 97. Somewhere in that area is where it cuts off and turns into Gen Z. And I am right at that edge of I'm a very young millennial, and then there would be a couple sources that might consider me the oldest of Gen Z. I feel like I've been seeing a fair amount of content over the past few months of millennial versus Gen Z and the war and the battle between the two generations and both sides kind of making fun of each other. And I wanted to make a video just talking about how we're actually so similar, perhaps more similar than other different generations that were next to each other, and I want to talk about why I think that is. But let me just start out with saying that if the issues and disagreements that the two generations are having are about styles of pants and where to part your hair, these are not real issues. I don't think anyone really thinks that they are. I hope no one from either generation is taking it that seriously, like it's that big of a deal to be calling yoga pants flared leggings. That's actually a good example of a topic, and I feel like it puts me on the millennial side because I would call that style of pant yoga pants because I wore them in high school and that's what we called them. But calling them flared leggings, I'm not super mad about it. I am a little sad that yoga pants didn't make enough of a lasting impact that a younger generation would still know what they're called. But calling them flared leggings is not incorrect. They are typically black, like leggings, and they have that same stretchy feel. The fit is it is just like leggings, except for leggings are tight at the bottom and yoga pants flare at the bottom. So to call them flared leggings is accurate. Okay, now I actually want to talk about why I feel like millennials and Gen Z are on the same page and they're more similar than you might think. And I think this is because millennials we don't feel like adults. And millennials, compared to previous generations, are buying houses way later in life, getting married way later in life, having kids way later in life, or choosing not to have kids, or choosing not to get married, or choosing not to have a house. These things all are a pretty big change in your life. You feel like you're an adult now when you have those things. You don't feel quite young like you used to when you didn't have those kinds of responsibilities. That's a big change in your life. Millennials are either just starting to do these things or they haven't been doing them very long, which is why they feel still young. They still feel like kids. I know I definitely still feel similar to how I did 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I lived in an apartment. I was in college. My day-to-day life hasn't changed super drastically. I don't have a house. I have a regular job, but I don't have a family. I have a boyfriend. I had a boyfriend back then, too. It feels similar. 30 doesn't feel old anymore. 30 feels like the new 20, because when our parents were 30, they had a house and kids and a dog. And when millennials are 30, they don't have any of those things yet. And I'm sure boomers will blame it on avocado toast, but the real thing to be blamed is student loan debt, and also graduating around the time of the 2008 economic recession and being at a disadvantage and having a really difficult time being able to build up wealth, and therefore not being able to make those steps into adulthood life. A lot of people talk about tech as a defining characteristic for a generation, and I feel like millennials and Gen Z are on the same page here as well. Like, a lot of the war that's been happening between the generations has been on TikTok. And I think the point here is that we're both on TikTok. Whether you're 28 or 18, you're on TikTok all day. Or just on social media in general, or just on your phone all day. And people say, well, millennials knew what it was like to grow up without tech. And I kind of did. I didn't know what it was like to grow up without a screen. I watched a lot of TV as a child, and I think Gen Z probably does too. A bigger difference, I think, is computers, because when I was growing up, we had a computer that I used, but it was the family computer. I didn't have my own computer, and now I feel like Gen Z does have their own computers for like school purposes. Honestly, it makes sense to me why more Gen Z have their own personal laptops compared to when I was in high school or middle school. But when it comes to being online and being on social media, those original influencers and creators who wanted to put out content on the internet are now like in their late 30s. Like Michelle Phan, OG, I always watched her, and she is like a good example to me of an original influencer, but also people like Jane Dawson or like Smosh. They were YouTube creators, and they're most definitely millennials. They were putting out content consistently online, and millennials were watching them when they were in middle school and high school. And now Gen Z is also doing the same thing. We're similar in that way. Gen Z is putting out content. There are plenty of influencer Gen Zs out there, you know. I guess probably Emma Chamberlain might be a good representative of a Gen Z influencer. At the end of the day, both millennials and Gen Z know what it's like to have online personalities that you really like watching. I know I was on YouTube all the time when I was younger, and Gen Z is also on YouTube all the time. And it's not that I grew up and remembered a life without tech and Gen Z didn't know a life without tech. It's just that by the time I was old enough to truly build up memories, tech was there. Like, I did used to have a VCR and watch VHS tapes, but when I was doing that, I was so young, I just don't remember it. I know that I did it, but I don't remember it. The stronger memories that I have are later in my childhood, obviously, because that's just what makes sense. You don't remember kindergarten as well as you remember the third grade, and by the third grade, computers were more relevant. And I think it's partly just about not necessarily what it was like as a child, but what it's like now. The relationship to tech, I feel, between millennials and Gen Z is very similar. In both cases, we're on our phone all day, or on our laptop, or on both at the same time. I know I do that all the time, and I know Gen Z does, and I know people who are older millennials than me 100% do that. We just don't feel like we as millennials are adults yet because we don't have as many of those classic milestones that we've reached. We're still in debt. We're still living in apartments. Things don't feel as differently, so we're tending to still feel like we're younger and relate more to younger people who are maybe still in school, but they don't have a ton of responsibilities, and neither do we. Another way that millennials and Gen Z are on the same page is politics, I think, in general, and the commonality being left and liberalism. This generally extends through a lot of generations. Younger people tend to be more liberal and older people tend to be more conservative. That has been like pretty solid across generations. However, there is some research that is showing that millennials may start to be one of the first outlier generations when it comes to growing conservative as they get older, because millennials are not growing as conservative as expected. It is seeming like millennials are going to continue having more leftist liberal beliefs even as they grow older rather than becoming more conservative. And the reason behind this, I'm pretty sure, usually people have more progressive beliefs because progressive just, I'm not trying to not get too political here, but progressive is about more change and conservatism is about more keeping things the same. And when you're in a more difficult place in life and you're having and experiencing a lot of problems and you're seeing other people around you experience a lot of problems, you want more change. And when you're in a secure place in life and you like where you are, you look around your social circle and they like where they are too, you don't want as much change. You like the current setup. And typically, when people get older, they become more content with their situation because they're building up wealth, usually. You are in a more stable financial situation as you're older, so you don't want a lot of change to disrupt that situation. Unfortunately, for millennials, really got the shit end of the stick in the fact that graduating around the time of an economic recession, having student loan debt that just does not match up with raises, and experiencing tons of unemployment and underemployment because of that recession. The comparison of cost of living and wages in the time that millennials were exiting higher education and entering adulthood, the reason millennials can't buy houses is not because they're spending all their money on frivolous things. There have been plenty of studies to show that millennials are set to be poorer than their parents, unfortunately. So instead of growing older and feeling more financially secure, millennials are growing older and feeling like things are still kind of sucky right now. I still can't afford bigger life purchases. I still am trying to pay off my student loan debt. So they're not becoming more conservative. Instead, they're tending towards the same policies that Gen Z is pushing for, which is a lot of social change, fighting against racism, environmental justice, those types of things. Millennials and Gen Z are similar in that way because millennials do still want to see that change because they're still hoping for something that can help them get out of the unfortunate financial situation that a majority of millennials are still experiencing. I saw a few things online saying that millennials are more optimistic and Gen Z is more realistic or maybe pessimistic. And this kind of surprised me because I know I'm like right in the middle, maybe a zillennial, I guess, but technically as a millennial, I certainly wouldn't say I tend towards optimism. I definitely feel like I relate more to Gen Z in that way, but I'm really surprised that I saw multiple sources say that because I definitely feel confused because in one breath, people know that millennials are struggling with debt and they don't have the wealth that their parents did at the same ages and they aren't as secure in their lives, and yet they're supposed to be optimistic. And like a lot of millennials graduating around the time of the recession, that wouldn't really give you an optimistic set on life if For example, you graduated the year of 2008 and couldn't get a job for a year. That's not really a great way to set up the rest of your adult life, is starting out with unemployment. I'm pretty surprised by that. At least I feel like the millennials and Gen Z I meet are more realistic and definitely concerned and worried about the future. I think rightfully so. There's a reason to be concerned. There is a reason to be concerned about climate change, because multiple scientific studies have said that for Gen Z and younger millennials now, we will 100% be negatively affected and experience the effects of the climate crisis. We're already starting to experience them now, like with more wildfires and other natural disasters. We're 100% going to be experiencing those types of things, but even worse as we grow older. And it's hard to feel optimistic about something as large as that problem. It seems so big and impending. It seems so hard to tackle that it's hard to feel optimistic about that kind of thing. So I definitely feel like the mindsets of millennials and Gen Z are more similar than different. I don't know if that's just, some bias has to be coming from me just because I'm very close to the youngest millennials and the oldest Gen Z, but I wanted to share my thoughts anyway. And if the biggest generational differences that we're fighting over is about whether or not skinny jeans are in, I think we're in an okay spot. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you liked it, and thanks for watching.